The transport shuddered as it tore through the upper atmosphere, its hull groaning under the strain of re-entry. Inside the dimly lit troop bay, 5 cadets from the Galactic Union's Officer Academy sat strapped into their shock frames, each representing a species renowned for their resilience. There was Grarv, a hulking Solarian whose chitinous plates could deflect small arms fire. Next to him, Vikess, a slender Zephyrian whose quick-twitched nerves made her a blur in combat. Korath, a methodical Thulian from a high-gravity world, sat perfectly still, his dense musculature a testament to his heritage. Zax, a tech savant Myrmidon, his 4 arms already running diagnostics on his environmental suit. And then there was Eli, the human, who appeared almost fragile in comparison, on humming a tuneless melody as he watched the planet swell on the monitor. The planet below, designated P781 Verminatus, was a notorious Class-3 Deathworld. The briefing had been a litany of horrors: hyper-aggressive megafauna, corrosive pollen storms, flora with a thirst for biomass, and atmospheric toxins that could seep through imperfect seals. Their mission was a standard 2-week survival deployment, the final and most brutal test before commissioning. Success meant a coveted officer's rank. Failure, or worse, death, was a statistical probability. Nervous systems elevated, adrenaline analogs spiking. "Typical," stated Zax, his voice a synthetic buzz, reading the biofeeds on his wrist display. He glanced at Eli. "Your readings are anomalous. Low. Are your sensors malfunctioning?" Eli cracked a smile, his teeth a stark white in the bay's red light. "Just breathing, Zax. Save the diagnostics for the wildlife." The ship jarred violently as it settled into a landing crater. The ramp hissed open, revealing a landscape of unsettling vibrancy. The air was thick, humid, and carried a cacophony of shrieks, chitters, and deep, booming roars from the triple canopy jungle that loomed like a wall of knives and vines. The light had a greenish, filtered quality. Giant, pitcher-like plants dripped viscous fluid, and the ground itself seemed to pulse with slow, insectoid movement. Grarv hefted his plasma cannon. "Perimeter secure. Air is toxic. Filter masks on. Move with purpose. The base camp beacon is 5 kilometers north-northeast." The others moved with disciplined urgency, checking seals and weapon loads. Eli took a deep, unfiltered breath through his nose, and his smile widened. "Ah, smells like petrichor and pepper, with a hint of something spicy." He ignored his mask, clipping it to his belt. Vikess stared, her large eyes wider. "Your pulmonary system will collapse. The spores—" "I'll risk it," Eli said, his tone light. He knelt, picking up a handful of soil, letting it sift through his fingers. He examined a thorn the size of his hand that had fallen from a nearby tree. "Interesting. Symbiotic fungal network in the dirt. And look, this thorn has a natural barbed design. Efficient." Korath grunted. "Analysis later. Movement now. We are exposed." They moved into the jungle. It was an assault on every sense. Bioluminescent fungi cast eerie shadows. Vines as thick as Grarv's leg coiled and uncoiled with lazy menace. Within minutes, a swarm of iridescent, razor-winged insects descended. Grarv's chitin rang with their impacts. Vikess became a whirlwind, slicing them from the air with her energy blades. Korath simply let them shatter against his rock-like skin. Zax deployed a sonic repellent field. Eli, seemingly the most vulnerable, slapped one that landed on his forearm. It left a shallow cut. He examined the welling blood, then the dead insect. "Neat. Anticoagulant saliva, like a mosquito, just bigger." Before Grarv could bark an order to move, the ground erupted. A segmented horror, a worm-like creature with a circular maw of grinding plates, burst from the soft earth, aiming for Vikess. Plasma fire and energy bolts scarred its hide but failed to stop its lunge. In that split second, Eli didn't shoot. He moved to a nearby tree. thus slammed his fist against a specific bulbous root nodule and jumped back. A cloud of intense, pungent powder exploded from the nodule directly into the creature's sensory ring. It recoiled, shrieking, and burrowed away in disoriented agony. The cadets stood in stunned silence, weapons still humming. Eli wiped the orange powder from his sleeve. Defensive symbiotic fungus. The tree feeds it. It deters burrowers. The worm must have disturbed the root. Lucky break. Zax's sensors whirred. That was not in the planetary database. Eli's smile returned. Databases are generalizations. Every world has its local tricks. They pressed on, increasingly wary. Eli's behavior was a constant, quiet dissonance. Where they saw lethal threats, he saw fascinating ecology. And he pointed out which fruits were likely edible based on their color and bird peck marks, identified a stream as safe to drink from by the presence of a specific filter-feeding crustacean, and avoided a patch of beautiful flowers by noting the absence of any animal tracks nearby. Their first major crisis came at dusk. They were crossing a rocky scree slope when the air itself seemed to attack. A pollen storm, the briefing had called it. A choking yellow cloud swept down the mountain, a corrosive miasma that hissed against their armor and obscured everything. Alarms blared on their suits, integrity warnings flashed. "Seal breaches detected. Myrmidon suit integrity at 87%, Zax called out. "Solarian plates are degrading," Grarv roared, trying to shield his face. "Find cover! There is none!" Vikes coughed. Through the burning haze, but Eli's voice was calm. "This way! Now!" He wasn't heading for cover. He was leading them toward the cliff face, to a seemingly sheer rock wall. As they choked and stumbled after him, he began brushing aside thick, rubbery vines. Behind them was not a cave, but a deep, dry crevice, shielded from the wind by an overhang. "In! It's tight, but it's clean!" They piled in, the corrosive pollen billowing past the entrance but not inside. In the cramped darkness, their suit lights flickered, showing Eli already unpacking a small kit. He applied a paste from a leaf he'd crushed to the scoring on Grarv's chitin. "Neutralizes the acid. Temporary, but it'll stop the etching." He handed a wad of fibrous moss to Vikes. "For your filter. It'll catch the finer particulates." Korath, his thick skin blistered. He watched as Eli treated them with quiet efficiency. "How did you know this place was here?" Eli shrugged, settling back against the rock. He took another of those deep, reckless breaths of the now clearer air in the crevice. "Saw the fracture line from the ridge earlier. The vine species growing over it is a moisture lover. Means it's damp in here, protected. The pollen storm was coming from the west. This face is east-southeast." "Simple." "Simple," Grarv echoed, the word foreign in his mouth. He looked at the human, who was now pulling a ration bar from his pack, looking utterly at ease. "You are not behaving like this is a Deathworld deployment." Eli took a bite, chewed, and that infuriating, effortless smile returned. "With all due respect, Cadet Grarv," he said, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Where I'm from, we call conditions like these spring break." The base camp was not a refuge, it was a trap. The prefabricated shelter, a durable alloy dome, was situated in a small clearing. It should have been a fortress. Instead, it was the epicenter of a siege. The clearing's perimeter was a writhing mass of creatures drawn by the shelter's power signature and thermal bloom, six-legged predators with chitinous hooks, swarms of sting flies, and things that slithered with too many teeth. The cadets fought their way to the door, a brutal, exhausting slog. Once inside, they sealed the locks. The exterior cameras showed a nightmare panorama. Grarv's plating was cracked in two places. Vikes had a deep gash on her leg. Korath was leaking a silvery fluid from a joint. Only Eli and Zax, who had fought from behind their shields, were relatively unscathed. Power at 65%. Shields cannot hold more than 12 hours under this assault, Zax reported, his voice tight. Distress beacon is active, but extraction is 96 hours away due to ionospheric interference. Grarv slammed a fist against the wall. We hold. We endure. It is the test. Eli, however, was not looking at the screens. He was examining the wall of the shelter itself, tapping it. Then he walked to the environmental control panel and shut down the heating system and half the internal lights. "What are you doing?" Vikes hissed. "We need power for the shields." "We're too bright, too warm," Eli said, his earlier casualness gone, replaced by a focused intensity. "We're a lighthouse on a dark coast, and every monster in the sea is coming to wreck itself on us. We need to be less interesting." "The protocol is to secure and hold the designated shelter," Grarv boomed. "The protocol was written by someone who studied this planet from orbit," Eli countered, his voice low but firm. "It doesn't account for the Ferroax pack hunters outside. See their patterning? The one with the scarred mandible? He's the beta. Where there's a beta, an alpha is directing the hunt from the tree line. They're smart. They'll find a way in, or they'll wait us out. We can't hold for 96 hours. He moved to the equipment lockers, ignoring the standard issue gear and pulling out the engineering kit. "Zax, I need you to modulate the shield frequency to a slow pulse, mimicking a low-grade bioelectric field. Korath, you're the strongest. Start pulling up these deck plates. Vikes, there's a medical stimulant in my pack. I synthesize more. Triple concentration. Grarv, I need you to look big and angry at that viewport. Keep their attention." They stared at him. He was issuing orders, and his logic, while insane, carried a chilling weight. He had been right about everything so far. Reluctantly, they moved. Zax's hands flew over the console. Korath began wrenching up the solid flooring. Grarv stood at the window, roaring and flaring his plates, drawing snaps and snarls from the beasts outside. Eli worked with furious speed. Using the deck plates and insulation foam, he began constructing a large, shallow pan. He took the concentrated stimulant from Vikes, a potent cocktail designed to keep a soldier fighting through shock, and mixed it with water from their reserves and a pouch of high-sugar nutrient paste. He poured the viscous, an energizing slurry into his makeshift pan. "The Ferox have a phenomenal sense of smell, especially for adrenal compounds and simple sugars," he explained, his hands never stopping. "We're going to give them a feast, but not here." Under the dimmed lights, they enacted his plan. Korath, using his immense strength, carefully lifted a section of the shelter's outer wall, a maintenance panel Eli had identified. Eli slid the pan of potent, aromatic slurry outside into the shadows at the side of the shelter. Zax, on cue, dropped the shields for exactly 3 seconds and pulsed the external lights. The effect was instantaneous. The creatures, focused on Grarv at the main viewport and the now darkened shelter, caught the scent. It was a primal, irresistible call, the smell of easy, energy-rich prey, with shrieks and snarls. The entire swarm turned and descended upon the slurry pan in a frenzied fighting heap. It was chaos, a perfect distraction. "Now, go, go, go!" Eli whispered fiercely. They slipped out the maintenance hole, one by one, into the pungent, roaring darkness of the jungle. Eli was the last out, sealing the panel behind him. He led them not deeper into the jungle, but along a narrow game trail that skirted the clearing, moving with a predator's silence that surprised even Vikes. They watched from the foliage as the beasts tore into the slurry and then, in their overstimulated state, began turning on each other. The shelter, now silent and dark, was forgotten. An hour later, they were in a new location. A high, rocky bluff overlooking the clearing, hidden by a waterfall of glowing moss. A natural fortress. They were safe for now. Grarv looked at Eli, who was calmly filtering water from the moss runoff. "You disobeyed protocol. "You gambled our lives and the mission," Grarv stated, but the accusation was hollow, replaced by a dawning realization. Eli met his gaze. "The mission is survival. The shelter was a death sentence. Protocol is a tool, not a prophecy." He gestured to the verdant, terrifying world around them. "This isn't a test of how well we follow the rules of a dead world. It's a test of how well we live in a living one. And where I'm from, spring break is all about adapting your plans when the party gets too hot." The extraction day dawned with a metallic screech echoing through the valleys. It wasn't the sound of their rescue ship. It was the cry of the Titan Scorpion, a creature so large it was classified as a mobile environmental hazard. It had been drawn by the week of accumulated battle sounds, pheromones of fear, and perhaps the distant echo of the shelter's final power surge. It moved through the jungle below their bluff like a living fortress, its crystalline stinger dripping with neurotoxin, its pincers capable of shearing through starship plating. The cadet's distress beacon chirped. The message was clear but grim. "Rescue shuttle is inbound. ETA 30 minutes. Landing impossible due to local megafauna. You must reach the designated LZ, clearing Gamma, 5 kilometers east." The unspoken message hung heavier. "If the fauna stops you, you are not coming home." Grarv looked at their battered squad. They were low on ammunition, low on energy, and the only path to the LZ went straight through the Titan Scorpion's projected path. "We fight," he said, and the resignation of a warrior facing his end in his voice. "We carve a path. It is the only way." Eli was silent, studying the beast through his macro lens. He watched its movement, the way it paused to dig for burrowing creatures, the flick of its stinger when a flock of screechers dove at it. He saw not just a monster, but an animal, a very large, very dangerous animal behaving predictably. "No," Eli said, his voice cutting the air. "We don't fight it, we use it." He laid out his plan. It was audacious to the point of suicidal. They would not run from the beast. They would go towards it. They would use the very hyper-aggressive ecology of the Deathworld as their weapon. They moved with a unity they had lacked before. There was no more debate. Eli was in charge. He led them down from the bluff, not away from the thunderous footsteps, but on a parallel course. They reached a vast, boggy sinkhole, filled with what looked like giant, placid lily pads. "Zax, modulate your sonic repellent to the frequency I'm showing you. Not to repel, to irritate. Aim for the nerve clusters at the base of the scorpid's legs." Zax complied. The subsonic pulse was inaudible to them, but the Titan Scorpion shuddered and let out a roar of annoyance. It turned, its multiple eyes seeking the source of the irritation. Eli then directed Coriath and Grarv to hurl prepared bundles of thorn vines and the remaining stimulant paste into the bog. The viscous mixture splattered across the giant lily pads. The lily pads were not plants. They were the dorsal shells of bog skimmers, colossal territorial amphibians that tolerated nothing in their domain. The irritant and the foreign scent enraged them. Dozens of huge frog-like heads emerged, glands along their backs inflating and glowing with bioluminescent rage. The Titan Scorpion, now agitated and seeing the bog skimmers as challengers, charged into the sinkhole. The resulting battle was cataclysmic. The earth shook. Toxin clouds met jets of corrosive slime. Pincers snapped and giant tongues lashed out. "Now! Run the edge!" Eli yelled. While the two titans clashed in a world-shaking duel, the cadets sprinted along the narrow, solid ground at the sinkhole's rim. They were insects scurrying past god warriors. Stinging spores from ruptured fungi rained down, and shockwaves from the fight nearly knocked them off their feet, but the path was clear. They ran through the chaos unseen and unchallenged, and they broke into clearing Gamma just as the whine of the descending rescue shuttle pierced the air. The shuttle, a sleek Union craft, hovered, its dorsal turrets nervously tracking the distant, earth-shaking roars of the battling titans. The cadets stood at the edge of the clearing, filthy, wounded, but alive. As the shuttle's ramp extended, the instructor, a grim-faced veteran with scars from a dozen worlds, strode down. He took in their condition, the missing shelter, the lack of standard-issue gear. His eyes settled on Grarv. "Cadet Commander? Report? Mission status?" Grarv stood tall. He looked at his squad, at Vikes leaning on Korath, at Zax with his flickering optic, and finally at Eli, who was crouched, curiously examining a resilient purple flower that had pushed through the scorched earth. Grarv turned back to the instructor. Mission accomplished, sir. Survival parameters achieved. The Class 3 Deathworld designation for P781 is inaccurate." The instructor's brow furrowed. "Explain." Grarv's mandibles clicked in what, for a Solarian, was a sigh of profound acceptance. "It is not a Deathworld, sir. Not for a human." He gestured to Eli, who stood up, dusted off his hands, and gave the instructor that same easy, infuriating smile. The instructor followed Grarv's gesture. "Cadet Elias, your assessment?" Eli looked back at the roaring, vibrant, terrifyingly alive jungle, then at the waiting shuttle, a piece of sterile, safe civilization. A flicker of what might have been disappointment crossed his face, replaced by his default cheerful expression. "My assessment, sir," he said, his voice carrying over the distant thunder of the monster fight. "My adequate flora and fauna. Decent challenge. But overall," he shrugged, tossing the purple flower into the jungle breeze. "Felt like spring break." He then turned and walked up the ramp into the shuttle, leaving the instructor and the galaxy to wonder, with a new and unsettling awe, what on earth a real challenge must be.